So what we're about to hear here are examples of Russian propaganda that will be provided by the head of the office of the president. It's an advisor. His name is Serhiy Lashenko, and he's going to be showing example after example. Now, I do this kind of thing all the time, and periodically I'll get pushback by people who will say, hey, you should leave this alone. All you're doing is giving them air. No, what I'm doing is trying to burst their balloon by showing what's actually happening. At very worst, what I'm giving is an inoculation. Yes, I'm putting a little of their contaminant into your system, but I'm hoping that that will diffuse it and hopefully keep it from spreading like a contagion. Okay, so he's going to speak. You'll hear him speak in Ukrainian, and then it'll shift into an English voiceover, and I'm going to amplify a few points that are very important. This comes directly from the UATV website, and let's hear what they have to say.
Брифінг присвячений викриттю фейків та пропаганди держави-агресора.
Good day, and we will hold another briefing dedicated to exposing fakes and propaganda of the aggressor state. They are forced to refute the statement of the head of Russia, Putin, who, speaking at BRICS events, once again allowed himself to lie to the whole world, claiming that it was Western countries that started the war against.
Okay, so that it was Western countries that started the war. Putin has been very consistent about this particular narrative, and he has said it and resaid it and resaid it and resaid it. And it reminds you of the Goebbels quote that if a lie that's told enough becomes the truth, or that's a little paraphrase of it. But if you keep saying a lie long enough, it actually becomes in this popular imagination as if it was true.
Against Ukraine. First, with the help of Western countries, an anti-constitutional coup was carried out, and then a fierce war.
Okay, anti-constitutional coup was carried out, and I've never been able to find any original source anywhere that points to a smoking gun that there was an anti-constitutional coup. I know that the president fled, but there wasn't a coup. There wasn't this effort to overthrow him. There was the protest on the Maidan. That's what was happening.
Was waged against those who did not agree with this coup. Extermination for 8 years. And Russia simply made the decision to support people who are fighting for their culture, traditions, language, and so on and so on. This statement is a lie, because the coup d'etat interpreted by Putin is actually the decision of then President Yanukovych to shoot Ukrainian citizens right in the central square.
Yeah. Remember, Yanukovych was cracking down on Ukrainians. There were soldiers shooting on Ukrainians in the square, and that was all bad. And so if there was anything that was coup-like, he created his own mess, but there was no coup in and of itself. There was not like a CIA plot behind the scenes. Let's gin up some riots. Yanukovych made his choices, and the people did not like it. That was what was happening.
Russia's interference in those internal Ukrainian political processes was only a pretext in order to annex part of our territory. After all, the annexation plan, as it later became known, was prepared in advance.
Okay, now that's really interesting. So, if you heard what he said, that this was a pretext, there was a plan prepared in advance, they found out later, to annex these sections of Ukraine. And it was pre-planned, and they used the coup, the Madonna uprising, as a pretext to go in and actually do that.
In fact, the protests had nothing to do with realizing Putin's vision of annexing Ukrainian territories. And of course, statements about alleged persecution part of Ukrainian citizens is also untrue. At the time when the annexation of Crimea and the aggression in the east of Ukraine took place, Ukraine was a neutral state, and the Russian language had all the necessary statuses, because at that time President Yanukovych was in power.
Right. Remember, Yanukovych was very Russia-looking. He was very pro-Russia, Russia-friendly, and he didn't sign the agreement with the EU, which would have moved them more closer to the European Union, and he didn't sign that. And so it doesn't make sense that Russia or Ukraine had been persecuting its own citizens because Yanukovych was still in charge. So Like, if you think about this logically, that doesn't add up.
That is, these interpretations on Putin's part are simply an attempt to justify the war he started against Ukraine. Let's talk further. And it is interesting that now Russian propaganda is more focused on confusing the traces of the death of Prigozhin, one of the terrorists who came to Ukrainian soil with the war. If you follow what Russian propaganda allows itself, it is very reminiscent of the same methods that they used in the same way in the information war against Ukraine. The most interesting of these methods, of course, can be seen on the Putin in Telegram channel, in particular confusing the tracks. They say that Russians cannot accept the death of Prigozhin and make tarot readings. Woman asks the cards, is it true that the owner of PMC Wagner died? The Russian woman says that Prigozhin was alive, and the statement of the media is a lie. It seems that this...
Okay, so they have in their Russian propaganda that someone had a tarot card reading and found that Prigozhin is still alive. They're just confusing the citizenry. They're not actually... I mean, that's useless. The tarot card reading, but they're confusing, and they're confusing for a reason, because they want to get to the... Instead of finding out who did it, they want to say, we'll never know, we'll never be able to tell, it'll be a mystery. Is he still out there? Well, if he's still out there, then you don't have to find out, was it actually him? And if you find out it was actually him, then you have to start to find out, like, well, who is behind it, or why did it happen?
This is done in order, as always in this totalitarian state, to confuse its own citizens, and then say the only sacramental phrase, no one will ever know what really happened. But these are internal affairs of Russia itself. Who is killing whom? If we look at how Russian propaganda tries to justify its own failures on the battlefield, it reaches a comic point no worse than a tarot card. Thus, the Telegram channel Putin in Telegram claims that they say Ukraine uses drones with claws that still wounded Russians. These are in particular the words of the so-called Special Forces officer from the Akhmat battalion. The same large drones, slightly modernized, were previously used by the enemy in the Zaporizhia direction to steal our wounded. The soldier continues to the reporter of Moscow Komsomol. The drone is equipped with special devices visually reminiscent of claws, with which it captures a person. Yes, well, it seems that there are no limits for Russian propaganda in inventing its own fakes, but...
Yeah, creating drones that have claws that steal the wounded.
Here, in order to justify their own defeats on the battlefield, they are inventing non-existent victories. In particular, this same channel reports that, to the east of the Snake Island, an aircraft of the Russian Space Forces destroyed the US-made warship Willard C. Force with the landing group of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. This information is false, and the main Directorate of Intelligence of the Ministry of Defense has already published a video showing that, in fact, there was no attack on the ship. And all these fabrications from Russian propaganda once again confirm that you cannot believe a single word they produce.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. The US-made ship was theoretically attacked with Ukrainians on it east of Snake Island. I saw the Reuters article saying that they had said this, but again, they produced the evidence that no, it wasn't. But if you're in Russian society and you cannot get access to other reports that show nothing actually happened, you're stuck, and they know that, and that's why they produce this propaganda.
In the same way, one cannot trust those hired media killers who appear on Russian media channels, especially if their plume is more than toxic. On Solovyev's channel we see a statement by Jim Jatras, who is positioned as an American lawyer, political analyst, and media relations specialist. He claims the existence of the Ukrainian state is a source of danger. It was an invitation to the Western powers to intervene in this part of the world.
That's right. So a very common talking point is just the existence of Ukraine becomes dangerous to Russia. and so therefore it needs to be wiped away because it's not real to begin with. They'll continue.
Is they question the right of the Ukrainian state to exist in general, leave the Ukrainian state in whatever composition of territories it currently is. If Moscow does so, they will simply create another problem for themselves. This propagandist with an American surname claims. If you read what he says, he simply calls for the liquidation of the Ukrainian state as such, which fully corresponds to the rhetoric of Russian propaganda in the first days of the war, which they later changed, realizing that they were not able to seize Ukrainian territories thanks to the heroism of the armed forces of Ukraine. Let's see who this James Jatras is, who allows such people to make hateful statements in the Russian state media. In fact, this is a person who in 2003 was one of the PR staff of then Prime Minister Viktor Yanukovych. He worked at the VNEBL company, and then, when Yanukovych returned to power, he became a deputy at the American Institute in Ukraine. What was that? It was another propaganda ploy to promote the political narratives that Russia needs. In particular, this so-called American Institute in Ukraine, led by this same Jatras, advocated against Ukraine's course to join NATO. As it turned out,
so that's kind of interesting to know his background, right? And so that's what you want to look at. So you don't just say, oh, Colonel McGregor, he was an American soldier, and he says this, or Scott Ritter was an American Marine, and he said that. Check out their backgrounds and what else they have advocated.
This very figure headed the organization in Kosovo and was a defense witness for the former dictator of Yugoslavia, Slobodan Milosevic. It is not surprising that such discredited people work as propagandists of the Russian state. Russia's efforts to destabilize Moldova are also attracting attention. In particular, Solovyov tells about the fact that in Chisinau, participants of the Освобождение March and rally took to the streets calling for Ukraine entry into the Eurasian Economic Community. Despite the fact that Moldova is already a candidate country for joining the European Union, that is, according to the logic of even the political process, this rally has nothing to do with reality. But why is it being done? So that the situation in the country, in the neighbors of Ukraine, is unstable with the aim of carrying out a coup d'etat there.
And this is interesting. Okay, so sometimes they're telling the truth with a slant. Sometimes they're not telling the truth, but almost always they're trying to destabilize. Think about the Prigozhin issue. They're trying to destabilize what we actually know. Think about here, they're trying to destabilize the population. But you can do that just by putting in plenty of different lies so that people don't know what to focus on.
As well, and bringing to power pro-Moscow forces, which have repeatedly called on the Russian propaganda channels to use this territory for aggression against Ukraine. And another myth of the authorship of the Russian state government publication Российская газета publishes an article under the title "More than 10,000 Poles died in Ukraine during the special military operation." These are staggering numbers, and then they were reprinted by all Russian propaganda, the entire Zvezda pool and TV channel, the Ministry of Defense and the Moscow Komsomolets and Regnum, and other media. If you look, the primary source for this information is the publication Мысль Польска, which sympathizes with Putin and even regularly published articles by one of the ideologists of the war, Alexander Dugin. But then...
Okay, so he said, if you look at the primary source for that claim that 10,000 Poles died in Ukraine, and now that's important to point out, if you dig and find the primary source to something, it'll tell you where it leans, if it leans toward Ukraine or toward Russia or whatever. But always go and see if you can find the primary source. Don't just take somebody printed something somewhere and take their word for it. Go and dig that out. Don't just be lazy about it. If you do, then you'll see all kinds of things that you might not have seen before.
And after this fake was spread by Russian propaganda, even the editors of this pro-Putin Polish publication said that they had never published such information, and it was simply a fake. It wasn't even removed from the site, it was just never published. The information spread by the Putin in...
So sometimes they're just even bad at propaganda, where they lie about something when there's actually evidence that they lied about it, and But they don't seem to care. And part of the reason they don't care is because they have a locked audience within their own country and who can't go anywhere.
The program channel about the fact that the Motherland Monument, which recently got a trident on a shield, seems to have been dressed up in an embroidered shirt, is also fake. This information is complete fiction. No effort was even made in this regard. But in order to provoke and produce fakes in Russia, they don't need the truth. They just need to create a fake video. And finally,
Yeah, they don't even need to just create a fake video. I mean, if they do that, they can promote their lies. They just need one person, somewhere, anyone, creating a tweet. I mean, this is how simple it is. That says what they want to say, and then they'll carry it and recarry it and recarry it and say, well, so-and-so said this. And it's true that so-and-so said that, but it's not true. The content of what they said may not be true.
We once again prove that the Russian Church, the Russian war, and Russian aggression are connected. On the state resource Russia Today is a publication of the propagandist Golovanov, where he talks about the intention of the Russian Church to canonize Alexander Suvorov, making him a saint, and further informs that it was not for nothing that Putin's aggression against Ukraine began on the birthday of another righteous Fyodor Ushakov, and this, they say, is very close to Saint Suvorov, and now the Russian propagandist claims they, that is, Suvorov and Ushakov, protect the Russian soldier and pray for the victory of our weapons. What this proves is that the Russian Church, the Russian Special Services, the Russian Army and the Russian political leadership are one conglomerate, which adheres to one goal, the destruction of Ukraine. Therefore,
And it does appear that the Russian Orthodox Church has been weaponized by Russia to serve the Russian state, which is unfortunate. The church should be removed from that. The church should have distance from that and be just upholding the scriptures, but that does not appear to be happening.
or of course, there cannot be any leniency for this conglomerate, nor any excuses later, when there is a tribunal against the criminals of Putin's regime. This briefing I will conclude with a traditional call to learn the truth. If you live outside of Ukraine, in Russian it is the Freedom TV channel, in English it is the UA TV channel, and also trust the Ukrainian media and the Ukrainian military and political leadership. Before meeting.
Okay, so what did we learn? We learned that Russia lies in many different ways, and if you are aware of that, you know how to spot the lie, or at least how to track down the original source, or prove out for yourself what is happening or what's not happening. And if you do that, you'll be far more informed. I do this regularly, and if you want to keep yourself informed, please subscribe and ring the bell. I'll be back tomorrow, and I hope that you'll join me. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.